Welcome back! Welcome back? No, this time it's actually a welcome back to a brand new episode of OTMT. I am Surma.
I love the way you started too high there, realized you couldn't sustain it, and just came down an octave for the rest. I'm Jake, by the way. Hello.
And this is our podcast, and thanks to Shopify for letting us do this and giving us some money.
I mean, they don't give us money to do this. They pay for the hosting, but... yeah.
They do.
They pay us to do other things, which I think is fair enough. That seems fair, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's how society works.
Right. So are you gonna apologize to the listeners for what you did?
Yes. It was genuinely not planned to make this a two-part. I'm pulling a Wicked.
Pulling it? What's that?
Like, didn't you hear the whole drama that Wicked, the movie, where they turned the musical into a movie? A 2-hour 30 movie.
No?
And it turns out it's a two-parter, so it's going to be another 2-hour and 30 movie coming out, even though the musical itself is 2 hours long with intermission.
I didn't know that. Okay, yes, okay, that's outside of my sphere of knowledge. Hey, look, musicals, not my thing, I have to say.
What? I am shocked. Shocked, I say.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens when you live with a musicologist.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I mean, I've seen musicals. I've seen enough to know. I was once musical curious. I gave it a try, and I just decided I just didn't like it. So I'm not against people who like musicals. I think it's fine
as long as they do it in their own home.
As long as they don't rub it in my face. I'm fine with it. And say they're fine people. It's just not for me.
Yes. So my sincerest apologies to our listeners. I started the last episode saying we're going to talk about 2 proposals, and then we jabbered on about the first one for so long that the second episode felt like abuse. So that means we now have an entire episode where we talk about the juicy, the dramaful, the beautiful JS0 proposal.
Oh, here we go. Yes, finally. Right. This is what I want.
Shall we just jump straight in?
Just give me all the drama. Come on. Been waiting weeks for this.
So I guess first asterisk, is it a proposal? I'm actually not sure. So it was talked about in the last face-to-face meeting of TC39 in October. And it was just a slide deck scheduled in the open-ended discussion category.
And it kicked up a big old stink, if social media is to be believed.
Well, that's the thing, right? So this slide deck that was presented was linked to in the agenda, which is public, as it should be for a standards body. So applauding them. And the slide deck was, made and presented by Shu, our former colleague at the Googles. But the slide deck also lists other people, 1 person from Google, that being Shu, 2 people from Mozilla, 2 people from Apple, 1 person from Audible, and 1 person from Sony. So this is not just a proposal, or this is not a slide deck, I should say, where they go like, lol, Google doing shit. But this was actually, run by other people and other browser people.
Oh, interesting. Because with the drama that I saw, and like I say, like I said in the previous episode, I've been, because I knew you were going to do this episode, I've been trying to keep myself away from it, so I'm hearing this for the first time. But very much the information I saw suggested that Google is trying to destroy JavaScript forever.
Yes. And that is true. No, it's not. So there is a delineation that is also, again, made very explicit in the slide deck itself. These people who are listed on the first slide as we want to talk about this, they all agree on the problem at hand, and they agree that something should be done. The actual quote-unquote proposal, the thing that is proposed, showcased as a potential solution for this problem, called JS0, is by Google, is the preferred solution by Google, and may or may not be the preferred solution of these other people working for these other companies.
Oh, okay. So this is where the Google's killing JavaScript bits come into it. I see. So it's not totally made up.
Yeah, maybe. That being said, when I looked to the slide deck, I liked it.
Oh.
I was not... There's nuances, and we're going to talk about all of these. But as not a language implementer, JavaScript implementer, but someone who has recently dabbled in trying to build their own language, I thought that the proposal is quite good. Anyway,
okay, come on.
The reason the drama is interesting is because it was presented on October 8th. The drama on Twitter was on October 5th. So someone stumbled over, because the agenda is public and the slide decks were linked, somebody stumbled over this and decided to do a Twitter thread.
I mean, look, I don't blame them for that. That's a juicy slide deck.
It's a juicy slide deck.
Look at this. Look at this data. It looks utterly terrifying. We should talk about what's in the slide deck, because I have looked at the slide deck.
That's what I want to talk about. So I haven't really made up my mind whether I want to link to the Twitter thread, because I feel like it did go viral, at least for the standards of like a TC39 related topic. But also I don't want that person to necessarily get grieved if people think they were being a bit overzealous, but also I worry that the thread might not age super well. So I'd rather link to the slide deck and the official things, and people can hopefully, well, I'm going to say form their own opinion after listening to my opinion for what is probably going to be 2 hours. So let's see. So I'll try and explain this proposal, the slide deck, and how I understand it and how it's motivated. And maybe I can weave in a couple of like the misunderstandings or the concerns that I've seen and talk a bit about them.
Yes. So it was basically that Google is replacing JavaScript with Dart, right? That's
No, that was about 10 years ago.
Right.
They did do that, and then they backpedaled on that.
Okay, cool.
This one is actually at its core quite simple.
Right.
It splits the JavaScript language into 2 layers.
Right.
There is the JS0 layer, that is JavaScript as it is implemented by what TC39 calls implementers. So those are the engines, the browsers, the buns, the dinos of this world. Well, I guess, both Bun and Dino actually just use an engine from a browser, but you know what I mean.
Yes, sure.
And JS0 would probably be what JavaScript is today. Kind of like that. That's JS0. The second layer, second part, is JSSugar, which would kind of be its own separate specification, but a proper like standards specification. And that's the JavaScript that developers write. So now there's a separation between what browsers or what implementers can execute and what developers would write.
Okay. And so there's nothing new about this. I mean, we've been doing this for, well...
Kinda, yeah.
We've had that split for years, right? Like, I know that when I open up, like, JSBin or CodePen or whatever, like I'm in raw JavaScript mode, and whereas when I'm pretty much writing code for most of the time, I'm writing TypeScript, so I am writing some sort of sugar on top. Okay,
exactly. I think that's where a lot of the tension was seen by some of the developers who feel strongly about writing vanilla. So we can dive into that a bit. So the idea would be is that now basically it is part of the standardized process of writing JavaScript is that there has to be a translation tool that translates JSSugar into JS0. And you're right, that is already reality in most scenarios. Like you have your Babels or your SWCs or roll downs or TSC. You have usually in any non-throwaway setup a tool that processes your JavaScript, at the very least for minification, but most of the time you have some sort of target ES 2016 because you want to write ES 2020 and use newer features, but then it gets transpiled down to an older version of JavaScript because it has broader support by browsers, and so you have to worry less. And this is kind of like, what if we standardize that? And it's not just for the lols, right?
There's 2 worlds where this could happen, or 2 ways it could go. One way would be like, okay, TypeScript is now is brought in as part of JSSugar. It's standardized, so it's now not just Microsoft making all the decisions. It's a more of a sort of cross-company thing, but it's kind of acknowledged that this will never work just straight in a browser console. It's always going to be like something that is compiled down to normal JavaScript. And I am actually fine with that because I never really had an expectation of TypeScript ever making it into browsers proper. The other way it could go is that new features that developers want come along, and user agents, people who are the people on TC39 that are very powerful because they write the JavaScript engines. They're part of browsers. They're part of Google, Firefox, Apple. They say we can't be bothered with that, so it goes in JSSugar, and that's where everything goes from now on, and it really forks the language completely. And features that you would expect, like maybe things like async await, in this new world would have ended up in Sugar and never worked in the browser proper. And I think that's the case that people are afraid of, and so am I think.
I think this is the line that has to be defined and then carefully walked, because I think that is the risk. But the motivation that they list in the slide deck, I actually have some sympathy for. Because the tension that they very explicitly describe is they, as implementers and as standard body contributors, they're in this to help developers be productive in JavaScript. They want to make sure that they can use the paradigms that they need and want, and that they can express all the things they need to express to write good web apps. But at the same time, JavaScript has become so ubiquitous and is used in so many different forms and shapes that each addition to an engine, and that's what JavaScript language features are, they're an addition to an engine, needs to come with a lot of work to ensure stability and security, and of course also performance, because that's in the end what the end users feel, and that is arguably the main responsibility of the implementers, right? Like, they need to allow developers to do the thing while keeping the things stable and fast and secure for the end users. And I think most of us, many of us at least, already feel like JavaScript evolves very slowly.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, it's not like CSS, which seems to, like, especially these days, is growing features at an amazing rate.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you say, JavaScript sort of, it kind of a couple of features a year.
But from an implementer side, it's kind of like it's actually evolving too fast almost. Like, they struggle to keep the bar for performance and security that they have set for themselves or have been set for them by others. Just implementing support for a syntax is one thing, but then doing it correctly so it's fast and secure, I think it's easy to forget how much work goes into it. And I'm actually the one to speak for that because I've never done it myself. I've never worked on the engine myself, but I can see how, we know that when for each and map came around, that people were like, oh, but for loops are faster, and then work went into to make these functional paradigms faster because people wanted to use them, and it actually has additional benefits for optimization. It's like there is a lot of long tail work for each of these features so that they actually make sense. And so basically this split in audiences, one audience being developers who want to be productive and expressive and write terse and good code, optimizable code, and the other audience being end users who want a reliable and stable and high performing engine in their browser and all their web apps work, is kind of the split that is now reflected here in the language. So JS0, I would assume, would end up being very slow moving as a language. I assume it would almost be frozen.
That's the bits I'm worried about.
I think JS0 would only evolve for things that cannot be built at the level of JSSugar, or things that are just not working efficiently when implemented at the JSSugar level. So for example, I would say something like generators and async generators, because they not only, they're not just like a simple desugaring. They have to generate a whole state machine and require a runtime. And I think that would be an example where that is something that goes into JS0 rather than into JSSugar. Similarly, shared structs. That is something that I do not think can be realistically built at the JSSugar level and be, compiled down to the status quo. That is something that needs built-in engine support, and also something that as a result will need lots of time being reviewed from a security and privacy perspective with Spectre and Meltdown and all the things that kind of factor into this.
Yeah. So, but let's talk about things like, array.at, which is pretty helpful for getting like the last item of an array. Is that the kind of thing that's going to end up in JSSugar land?
Yes, I think that's a prime example, or like a proposal that recently made it to stage 4 is the iterator helpers, where now iterators have .map, .filter,
Yes.
all these things. Easy thing to put into JSSugar, really simple to implement as a simple desugaring, just like you turn one line of code into another line of code. It's very simple in that sense. The advantage here would be that JSSugar advances quicker because it's something that is not implemented at the engine level, but it is implemented at the tooling level. So that's something that only needs there's still a standard and there's still, the same processes, there's still agreement and consensus needs to be reached for something to get into JSSugar. But then you don't have to actually work through a browser release cycle, which is also good for browsers that have very slow release cycles sometimes. Once it's landed in JSSugar, it will probably be in tooling a lot quicker than it could be in a browser, also because it does not have security implications, because security is solved at the layer below. So that's how this is framed as a good thing, as a win-win.
Yeah, let's say, we can't do array.at in a fast way or a secure way. But then people are going to be using a Sugar implementation which either has those problems or doesn't. And if it doesn't have those problems, then why couldn't the browser just do it? I understand that if they're writing this stuff in Zig or C++ or whatever, that's, they're in a sort of more security sensitive zone. But why can't polyfills just be done in JavaScript, within the browser? But I guess the one difference between that is the versioning, right? Is with JSSugar, it's done by a tool which I'm in control of the version of, whereas with browser level features, it's the browser version.
And I think the other difference is whose job is it to implement it? I think one of the parts that they're calling out is that, the people who work on these engines are already stretched maintaining the bar. So if stuff that can be removed as work from them and be moved to other people, that would help move those more capability-focused features to move along quicker or with more confidence, because they were also saying that there have been some security incidents in the last years, I suppose, around JavaScript features that were shipped. The other thing that I thought was quite interesting is that they spent a lot of time implementing features and doing it right and doing it in high performance ways, which took a long time. And they still can't get the ecosystem to actually use these features natively because people just continue using their transpilers. So this is stuff like async generators or decorators, right? Both are now implemented. I think decorators maybe is not a great example, but async generators are implemented natively in all browsers, I want to say.
Yeah. I think for a good long while now.
And they just don't see them getting used natively because people continue to transpile them. For the people who are employed here and for the companies that pay these engineers, that feels like money wasted. And that's not maybe the right way to look at it. That's a problem of the ecosystem, that they don't they don't look after their transpiler configuration. But, we know this problem, that an ecosystem is really hard to move. We still find people nowadays shipping promise polyfills in their bundles.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's really hard so I'm really torn here, right? On the one hand, I'm this will lead to shipping bigger bundles. If the point is that nice syntactically terse features are now implemented at the JSSugar level and getting desugared, which usually means more code, means bundles get bigger so that developers can use nicer features at the language level. Is it significant? I don't know. But native support usually means smaller bundles. But then again, I can't really blame implementers for working with the data they see in reality, in that even if they do implement it natively and would allow you to ship smaller bundles and faster code, people don't, because for some reason they're too lazy or they don't know how to set up their transpilers appropriately so that they make use of new native language features. And so I can't really blame them for working with that.
Yeah, I'm really torn on this, because on one hand, I see the issue, the security issue and whatever, but then I also see two of the richest companies in the world, Google and Apple. It almost feels like a collusion of like, well, what if we just stopped competing on these features and our lives would be much easier.
And I get that, right? And also like there's also the other angle then the work is being moved to tooling, which I don't think as a concept is unreasonable. But if we're talking about reality, the reality is that a lot of the tooling people are volunteers.
Yes.
Right? Like I know and there's lots of companies that sponsor now, like, that make donations for like Rollup and Roll Down and Veed and like all these tools. But is that enough to justify you are now part of a standards body if you want to or not, and you have to implement this, and now you will have more pressure from the ecosystem to actually quickly implement any new proposal that lands, and probably even have like stage 1, stage 2 flags in your tools because people want to opt in early or something. And that is also something was pointed out by other people at TC39, where that is just a dynamic that we need to be really mindful of. And then, there's also the second order effects, which like you said, what does this mean for stuff like CodePen or JSBin? Where it's like, I mean, the obvious solution is like they could run a transpiler in the browser. You can run Rollup in the browser. But is vanilla.js dead? Is that a bad thing, right? Like to an extent, I almost see a parallel to WebAssembly here, where like I'm one of the weirdos that does sometimes write handcraft WebAssembly because I enjoy that. But that's obviously not the intended use case. Will it be the same with JS0 at some point, where people go like, I'm a weirdo, I write JS0, and most people just actually write another language that gets compiled to JS?
It's already the case to some degree with TypeScript, right? Like, yeah.
I think this proposal has merit. There is something to be said about like acknowledging the reality of how JavaScript is used today and actually standardizing it. The fact that even just now being able to talk, vanilla.js is always a bit hand-wavy because like what is vanilla.js if it's constantly evolving in the browsers? The split of JS0 and JSSugar, even though maybe that's not the names, right? But like having those as well-defined and even standardized entities feels good. Whether it actually means it should just be implemented by tooling is different. Maybe like you kind of hinted at, maybe it is something that the browser also supports. Like why shouldn't the browser bundle a JSSugar implementation? But it's something that is then implemented at a separate layer that can be maybe maintained by other people or fewer people in the browser. And then the lower layer of JS0 is where all the security sensitive work happens, for example.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. I think that would be, and then like, once performance issues were identified, then maybe, yes, that bit could be brought into, C++, Lanzig, whatever. And,
maybe it would finally allow us to use bind operator, which I know the two of us always wanted and never got. And we could just have it. It's interesting to me because, like, I think we both have often said, like, JavaScript, like we've said a couple times now as well, like, people who don't bundle or don't use any processing, they leave performance on the ground. Like it's free performance, free file size that they could have by just running a bundler or a minifier. Nobody expects you to write Rust or C++ without running a compiler. Why should JavaScript be different? Especially because JavaScript is so special as being on a streaming platform where file size matters so much compared to all the other languages where on almost any native format, file size doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think I still say that there is like an implementation of this which I like, which is like TypeScript is brought into it, and then that gets sort of more scrutiny, I guess, more careful development. Maybe some of the mistakes TypeScript has made in the past are less likely to happen in future.
Yeah,
it's not just one company in control of it. Like that all sounds good, but then I think the reason I feel icky about it is the ghost of IE6 still, is still there, this was a time where like, Microsoft dominated the browser space and they just stopped because they didn't have to do any more work. And whereas this is a different shape because the other browsers are still there, but it feels like they're all shaking hands and going, well, wouldn't our lives easier if we just all, didn't bother anymore? Like we all they all just colluded just to say, well, stop it.
But I mean, that's not really what is being said, right? Like, that's the thing. I think they still think the language would evolve. It's just about they would focus on capabilities.
No, and that's two extremes of implementation of this, right? Like, and
yeah,
even with the best of intents now, it's not necessarily where it will land. Like, so another thing that I'm reminded of is, feels like I'm just like shitting on Microsoft constantly, but it is another example here is when Microsoft dropped its engine and they said like, well, the great thing about us dropping our engine and getting Chromium instead is like we can all now work on Chromium, which was genuinely, I believe, the intent at the time. But then people higher up in the company went, wait a minute, we don't have to. So, because Google will do it. So, we could do other things. And I worry that with this agreement in place, that JavaScript now doesn't have to have any new features implemented by browser engineers. But we're going to work super hard on the other stuff. Someone higher up at Google's going, well, the ads team could use some more engineers.
And you know what? I think that it's at the very least a valid concern, right? Like for me, there was also the parallel. If now JS0 is kind of like a compile target, is it just a stepping stone that we just compile JavaScript to WASM at some point? I mean, WASM is currently a really shitty target for dynamically typed languages. Like it's just not very good. Like with WASM GC, it's a step in the right direction, but really like it's still not good for dynamic typing. But at the same time, like maybe that is something that at some point would happen, that we're like, no, we don't choose a language anymore. All the processing, compiling, transpiling happens outside the browser and you just ship one binary format to us, which I don't know, that could happen. That's kind of how phones work, right? With
Flutter as well, right?
Yeah.
Flutter, it's just like, well, we'll just ship our own engine.
One other thing that people did flag is like they were worried about the debugging experience. And I'm like, I mean, we have SourceMaps, and as much as I do not like them, they work pretty reliably nowadays. Like I'm always impressed that.
Do they? I should try them again because I have never had a great experience with SourceMaps, but that might be my fault.
It's like recently, whenever I built stuff with Vite, I step through my TypeScript code.
Okay.
That works. But I agree, like I have the same gut feeling where it's like, but they're not robust, are they? But then I keep thinking as well, like no engineer working on systems stuff steps through assembler. They step through their C++, C, or Rust code.
Fair.
So this problem has been solved, and maybe source maps just aren't the right solution or the right enough solution, and we just need to learn more from them. Like I'm talking about, like I know a lot about this, but I think this is a problem that is solvable because it has been solved for all those compiled languages. Like you can step through your C++ code and inspect the values, even though what is actually being executed is machine code on your processor. So why should JavaScript to JavaScript be suddenly so much harder?
That's fair. Oh, you've made an annoyingly good point.
But clearly, it is not at the point where we feel confident about that. So that is work that also would have to be done. So again, something to just be mindful of. Like it's still fair to be concerned about that.
Yeah, all right.
So that was effectively the rundown of JS0. I think it's not an official proposal in the sense that there is like a repository like for all other proposals. I'm assuming something like this may come along at some point. Stage 0, I suppose, because like I said, like it was only talked about in TC39 as like a discussion, and I guess we'll keep an eye on it, what this means for engines, for browsers, and also for tooling authors, because this is, I think, for me the biggest unknown, what it means to suddenly put more tooling people at the table at TC39, which I'm not even sure. Like you can't join as a single person; you have to have a company sponsor you, I think.
Well, that would have to change if they're kicking the can down to like,
yeah, for example, yeah, like I know that sometimes like some people are individuals and join TC39 as invited experts. Like Guy Bedford is one of these people who just has done actually a lot of proposals there. And I don't know, I'm claiming like he's an invited expert and not coming sponsored by a company, but it is definitely possible. But I think you're right. Like that's one of the things that probably should be revisited if now tooling people who are often just like open source volunteers are more or less forced to participate in this. And I hope that also then they would not be treated as like a second class member of the board, because I don't know, like is now JS0 the elite crew, and then JSSugar the just desugaring code? Like
I can see that happening. Yeah.
And of course, there's another person also was saying, how is this preventing from just repeating the same mistakes? Like, how do we not just end up with another intermediate layer before we then have to start migrating features from JSSugar to JS0 for performance reasons, and we just basically end up in the same spot, just with an even slower process? That I also thought was quite interesting. So many things to think about. But like I said, it's an early proposal. So we have to just follow along and see what happens to our beloved JavaScript.
It's interesting because it's going to be like you were saying before. We've made async iterators, but no one uses them. It's actually going to be harder to measure which of these JSSugar features are being used. Like you could look on npm for downloads of the package, but you don't know which of the features within it are being used, right? Unless they have a use counter, but no one will want that. So. Okay. Yeah, I am worried about this whole thing, but I'm not pitchfork level. I'm kind of interested to see where it goes.
On the scale of 0 to bat with nails in it.
Yeah, I've got a pitchfork on order, just in case.
You never know. The right to bear pitchforks. I will definitely put links to the slide deck and any other resources that I used. If I did get anything wrong, I will put notes in the notes. And
you also did a good episode on SourceMaps in general, which I think goes through some of the issues that we've had with them.
Oh yeah, because I built Wasmphobia, where I learned about how SourceMaps work. Yeah, we're going to link to that as well. Let's plug our own stuff. That's always great.
Amazing.
Almost another 40 minutes. Oh my God. I think people might be very tired of me now. So I think I should not waste any more time and just say the only thing that is left to say at this point, which is happy next time.
Bye. All right, that was good. I enjoyed that.